G'day and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at basically mages, discussing some of the changes that have occurred to mages in the pre-patch for the War Within. So we've done most of the classes, I think, with a lot of changes. Mage, I think we've got Warrior left, maybe we've done Priests, Paladins as well, but we'll see. But mages, basically, as with all other classes, have had all their talent trees reworked. New talent, Barrier Diffusion. Whenever one of your barriers is removed, reduce its cooldown by 4 seconds, located in Dragon's Breath previous location. Inspired Intellect, Arcane Intellect grants you an additional 3% intelligence trace node with time anomaly. Look, 3% intellect is obviously a flat buff, but I don't know how big a deal that's going to be. Very difficult to say. Time anomaly has been updated. Now grants Brain Freeze instead of Fingers of Frost. It's interesting. Supernova added to Mage class tree was Arcane tree and now has a 45-second cooldown. So interesting. Mass Polymorph now polymorphs targets for 15 seconds was 60. This is very similar to their changes to Root. And Mass Slow has been removed. So look, I think like 3% intellect is a bit of a whatever. It's a passive change. Time anomalies change. Also a little bit strange. Kind of removing a bit from your flow, giving you more utility. Barrier Diffusion, okay, it is what it is. Now let's look at Arcane specifically. So Arcane new talent, Energize Familiar. During Arcane Surge, your Arcane Familiar fires 4 bolts instead of 1. Damage from your Arcane Familiar has a small chance to grant you up to 2% your maximum mana. So a bit of mana regen, which I think is fine. And increased damage from the Arcane Familiar. I don't see anything wrong with this talent. It's just a bit of a resource management tool. Eureka, when a spell consumes clear casting, its damage is increased by 25%. Okay. This is fine as well. Also just more of a set rotation, way to like control your utility and also to kind of mitigate in your rotation a little bit of the impact of damage spiking, allowing you to do a little small spike with consuming clear cast. New talent Time Loop. When you apply a stack of Arcane Debilitation, you have a 10% chance to apply another stack of Arcane Debilitation. This effect can trigger off of itself. So what that means is you can, in theory, infinitely stack Arcane Debilitation very quickly if you get very lucky. But look, I think Arcane Debilitation is obviously quite important for the increase in damage over time against an enemy. But with that being said, to get simultaneous procs on a 10% ability is not the easiest thing to do. Arcane Debilitation, as you can see here, damaging a target with Arcane Missiles increases damage they take from Arcane Missiles, Arcane Barrage, and Arcane Blast by 1%. So, like I said, it's a way to help stack damage. To get multiple procs off at once is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Aether Attunement, every 3 times you consume clear casting, gain Aether Attunement. Aether Attunement, your next Arcane Missile deals 150% increased damage to your primary target. It fires at up to 4 nearby enemies, dealing 100% increased damage. Lay Sight, Nether Precision damage bonus increased to 30%. Lay Drinker, consuming Nether Precision has a 20% chance to make your next Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage echo, repeating its damage at 6% effectiveness to the primary target and up to 4 nearby enemies. So let's talk a little bit about the Nether Precision and obviously the Arcane Blast, Arcane Echo. So I don't know if you're noticing a trend here, but basically there seems to be 3 kind of mini rotationary players that they're trying to introduce here. So obviously you have consumption of clear casting, you have stacking of Arcane Debilitation, and then now you also have ley lines. So Nether Precision, the buff increase in your damage. Now consumption of Nether Precision increases your AOE damage. So it's just ways to do small slight changes to small inner flows within your rotation to kind of help out. New talent, improved Touch of the Magi. Your Touch of the Magi now accumulates 25% of the damage you deal. Okay, that's fine. New talent, Magi Spark. Your Touch of the Magi now also conjures a spark, increasing the damage your target receives from your next Arcane, Blizzard, Blast, and Missile by 25%. Upon receiving damage from all 3 spells, the spark explodes, dealing arcane damage to all nearby enemies. This is, again, helping with a bit of AOE. Arcane and AOE, not necessarily the best friends, so this does help a little bit. Nether Munitions, when your Touch of the Magi detonates, it increases the damage of all affected targets take from you by 8%. Again, AOE improvement. Surging Urge, Arcane Surge, damage increased by 5% per Arcane Charge. Consortium's Bauble reduces Arcane Blast mana cost by 3% and its damage by 3%. Resonant Orbs, Arcane Orb damage increased by 10%. I'd just like to point out that the reduction in mana cost by 3% and the damage increased by 3%, like this, is more meaningful in a long fight situation than a 3% intellect increase, just because it affects a more commonly utilized spell. Film Rotation, Energy Reconstitution, damage from dematerializes a small chance of conjure an arcane explosion, 50% effectiveness is its target's location. Arcane explosions conjure this way to not generate arcane charges. Big Brained, gaining clear casting increases your intellect by 1% for 8 seconds. Multiple instances may overlap. Okay, so again, just a way to help stack brief spike periods of damage. Set a Cloud, each time you cast Arcane Explosions, damage is increased by 25%. This resets upon 100% damage. Okay, so a nice way to help with your load. High Voltage, damage from Arcane Missiles, has 20% chance to grant you 1 Arcane Charge. Chances increased by 5% every time they fail to grant you an Arcane Charge. This is resource regeneration, it's actually quite nice. Really nice way to help kind of claw back a bit of Arcane Charges. Arcane Missile has been redesigned, can only be cast when you have clear casting. The wording of talents associated with Arcane Missile have been updated to reflect this change. So again, this falls back into the whole clear casting thing. Definitely an emphasis now on your management of clear casting the buff and the expenditure of that buff. So it's very, very important now. Now the precision has been redesigned. Consuming clear casting increases the damage of the next 2 arcane blasts by 20%, to your next 2 arcane barrages by 20%. Arcane Familiar has been redesigned. Casting Arcane Intelligence also summons your familiar that attacks your enemies and increases your maximum mana by 10% for 1 hour. Now passive. So the familiar is no longer a separate spell, it's tied to Arcane Intelligence. I think this is fine. For me, if characters have summons as part of their class lore, there shouldn't be a requirement or build in which you have to lose or constructively build around maybe not having that companion. That's why I really don't like the idea of Lone Ranger hunters. It makes no sense to me. The class lore is having a pet. Illuminated Thoughts has been redesigned. Clear casting is a 5% increased chance to trigger, and spells that consume clear casting deal 5% more damage. Concentration has been redesigned. Casting Arcane Blast has a small chance to make your next Arcane Blast free. Evocation has been updated, increasing your mana regen by 1,500% for 2.8% and granting clear casting. While channeling Evocation, your intellect is increased by 2% every 0.5 seconds. Lasts 20 seconds. So this is pretty big. So Evocation's been updated. It's a huge mana regen spell. It's your mana regen spell, I should say, and basically it's now kind of doubling up a little bit. Instead of just being a burst mana regen for when you obviously it's now also doubling up basically as a buff. So what it does is it rewards you a little bit, makes it less punishing to refresh your mana. So before, players would really is really difficult to balance around the line of having mana issues, because you want to obviously restore your mana, but then you don't want to not cast spells. But in this situation, now what's happening is you're getting an intellect buff during that time period, so your next couple of spells coming out of that period of mana regen will be better. Improved Prismatic Barrier is now learned automatically when specializing in Arcane. I think this is fine. And then Banner Adept is now learned automatically when specializing in Arcane. Arcane Orb is now learned at 45. Arcane Orb damage reduced, blast damage increased, barrage damage reduced, and missile damage increased. So they've reduced the 2 AoE spells damage, but this is to compensate for the fact that they've added a lot of AoE procs up here in the talent tree. So in a lot of ways to improve overall AoE damage, but to do so they've reduced some of the direct AoE damage that occurs, but they have increased the single target damage. So the class feels definitely, at least in one aspect, like you can build it in the route of doing single target damage to proc and trigger AoE damage, which is very interesting. Clear casting's chance to trigger is no longer tied to mana spent, and now just has an 8% chance of triggering whenever casting any damaging spell. So this is obviously the big change. Clear casting also utilizes bad luck protection instead of true randomness. So this is a huge change. Clear casting, of course, now being tied to kind of RNG, but not really. It's got bad luck protection. So what that means is you have an 8% chance of triggering. However, if it doesn't trigger, there's a slight chance that the next one will trigger a little bit more. And as you fail to trigger, it will gradually step that chance up until you are almost guaranteed to trigger it. This is to prevent the rotation in the class feeling too RNG and feeling like there's moments, especially if you're going a very heavy clear casting route with some of those talents, feeling like a moment where you are basically tied to RNG generating and maximizing your performance, which is very interesting. So Action Surge is now guaranteed to generate clear casting. Arcane Blast has 5% chance to increase generate clear casting. Supernova has a 45-second cooldown. Savant now increases the damage dealt by Arcane Surge, and then the class set bonuses have been redone. So it's a very huge rework. To be honest with you, if you look at all of the talents that have been removed and the talents have been added in, it's a very clear sign that they're reworking Arcane. So Arcane now definitely stems, depending on what talent you choose, but definitely stems more into clear casting management, arcane debilitation management, leyline management, and you can kind of focus in on one of these routes, and also obviously some new ways to protract that AoE damage. So very interesting. I will say Arcane and Mage in general is looking like it's very, very reworked. So it's going to be super interesting to kind of discuss all of these, except for Frost. But so anyway, Fire. So Fire has a couple of new talents that we need to take a look at here. So we have Lit Fuse. Consuming Hot Streak has a 50% chance to grant you Lit Fuse. Lit Fuse, your next Fire Blast consumes. Turns up to one nearby target into a living bomb that explodes over 2 seconds, dealing fire damage to the target and reduce damage to all their enemies. Up to 3 enemies also become a living bomb, but this effect cannot spread further. So it is a AoE damage generator. So again, you can see there. So how can I put this? When classes historically do AoE damage through like 2 major spells, like so Firestorm, Hellfire, Rain of Frost, etc. These are the absolute worst ways to do AoE damage. So what the game is trying to do, or what they're trying to redesign here, is to make performing this damage, yes, maybe more RNG based, but to make it more an intrinsic part of your build so that you can prioritize doing certain things, more so than trying to make it so that you have to stand there safe casting a spell without being able to move, because raids have to get progressively more complex. Making classes have to move or do certain things as part of that. So by changing rotations to accommodate a bit more AoE on the fly, by being a bit more RNG, they free up the fact that you can just run around fire blasting everything, which gives you more mobility. Explosive Ingenuity, your chance of getting Lit Fuse when consuming hot streaks is increased by 20%, living bomb damage by 25%, that's fine, it ties into the above change. Down in Flames, Scorch deals 300% damage to targets below 30%, basically giving you an execute, which is pretty cool. Quick Flame, Flame Strike damage increased by 20%, okay, there's nothing crazy there, it's just an AoE buff. Focus Fury, Living Bomb deals more damage the fewer targets it hits, up to 300% at one target. So this is kind of inversing your Living Bomb mechanic and making it more so that you are prioritizing single target damage, especially against bosses. Mark of the Fire Lord, Flame Strike, Living Bomb, apply Mastery, which ignites at 100% increased effectiveness. Okay, it's interesting. Spontaneous Combustion, casting Combustion refreshes up to 3 charges of Fire Blast and up to 3 charges of Phoenix Flame. Okay, that's cool. So basically just a way to kind of instantly re-trigger and to reset rotationary wise and just kind of go for a new burst. Fire's Ire. When you're not under the effects of combustion, it also makes it less punishing for smacking on spontaneous combustion at the wrong time. When you're not under the effect of combustion, your critical strike chances increase by 2.5%. When you're under the effects of combustion, your critical strike damage is increased by 2.5%. So 2.10, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but it does. It adds up. Explosivo. Casting Combustion grants Lit Fuse and Living Bomb's damage increased by 50% while under the effects of combustion. Your chance of gaining Lit Fuse is increased by 30% on the effects of combustion. So this is just a way to tie in making combustion proc way more AOE damage, which is very interesting. Blast Zone, Lit Fuse now turns up to 3 targets in the Living Bombs. Living Bomb can now spread to 5 enemies. This is just a straight AOE buff to the previous Living Bomb rotationary adjustment. Ashen Feather, Phoenix Flame hits only 1 target. It deals 25% increased damage and applies Ignite at 100% effectiveness. So that's single target blast damage. Majesty of the Phoenix Wind, Phoenix Flames damages 3 or more. Target your next 2 flame strikes have their cost damage reduced by 1.5 seconds and damage increase. So you can see, like, basically, you can turn the Living Bomb mechanic into a more single target mechanic, or you can turn it into more AoE. And same with Phoenix Fire so far. You can either turn it into more AoE or make it more priority single target. Molten Fury. Damage dealt to targets below 35% is increased by 7%. Okay, so this is just more a ramp up spell. Damage from Ignite has a 5% chance to make your next Scorch cast instant. Deal damage as though your target was below 30% health. This is interesting because basically it can turn Scorch into a huge single target damage dealer for you. Give or take how lucky you are with procs, and I think that's really cool. Sparking Cinders, Living Bomb explosions have a small chance to increase the damage of your next Pyroblast by 10% or Flame Strike by 20%. Again, this is an AoE because obviously it's now proccing off of Living Bomb explosions. This thing can increase Flame Strike damage and Pyroblast. Pyroblast can connect all the way here to more damage. So it's very interesting. Where are we going? Here we go. Ferment Flickering has been redesigned, now reduces the cooldown of Fire Blast by 2 seconds. Controlled Destruction has been redesigned. Damaging a target with Pyroblast increases damage it receives from Ignite by 0.5%. 5%. This gets stacked up to 50 times, so 25%. A single target ramp up ability, similar to the Arcane Debilitation spell change. Controlled Destruction has been redesigned. I know we've just read that. Improves Scorch. Casting Scorch on targets below 30% increases damage the target takes from you by 6%. This effect can stack up to 2 times, so this can proc now off of your insta-cast, which is cool. Flame Accelerant has been redesigned. Every 12 seconds your next Fireball, Flame Strike, or Pyroblast has a 40% reduced cast time. Very interesting. This is just a rotationary thing. Unleashed Inferno has been redesigned. While combustion is active, your Fireball, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Scorch, and Phoenix Flame deal 50% increased damage and reduce the cooldown of combustion by 1.25 seconds. While combustion is active, Flame Strike deals 25% increased damage and reduces the cooldown of combustion by 0.25 seconds for each critical strike up to 1.25 seconds. So this is interesting. Basically, to cut a long story short, it's just a way to proc combustion a lot more and integrate it more into your rotation. So it allows you to placate the spiking a little bit and proc that combustion over and over and over again, which will benefit all of those abilities, which will then reduce the cooldown, which will then proc it more often. Convection has been redesigned. When the Living Bomb expires, if it did not spread, it refreshes its duration. It's interesting. Pyromaniac's been designed, casting Pyroblast or Flame Strike while Hot Streak is active with a 6% chance to repeat the spell. Phoenix Reborn, when your direct damage spells hit an enemy 25 times, the next damage is increased by 100%. They refund the charge on use. This is a single target change. Ashes has been redesigned. Phoenix Flames damage increased by 50%. Your direct damage spells decrease the cooldown of Phoenix Flames. Deep Impact has been redesigned. Meteor now turns one target hit into a living bomb. Occasionally its cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. Yeah, so lots of changes to kind of prioritize, like I said, to either proc more living bombs, which you can then make more single target orientated, or to just do more single target damage, basically through Phoenix Flame and charge cooldown. Fuel of the Fire is now learned automatically when specializing fire. Searing Touch's critical strike threshold is now baseline to Scorch. Improved Scorch's movement speed increases now baseline to Scorch. Okay, so you don't have to take improved Scorch for the movement speed increase. Living Bomb damage increase. Living Bomb now applies Ignite. Living Bomb now spreads to 3 targets, not 5. Living Bomb applications are slightly desynced to minimize overlapping. Phoenix Flames damage reduced. This is because they're going to allow you to proc it as many times as you want. No, but a lot more. Pyroblast damage reduced. Intensifying Flames Ignite damage bonus reduced. And Sun King's Blessing now grants Sun King's Fury after consuming 10 hot stacks. So before we continue, let's just talk about these changes. So looks like they're debuffing, or they're lowering the effectiveness of some of these spells, but you gotta remember these spells are now going to be procced a lot more. In the case of Phoenix Flames, a lot more. So they're just doing it to compensate for the overall boost that they've given through the increased frequency of certain casting of spells for certain mechanics. Sun King's Blessing, this one seems fine. Flame On no longer reduces cooldown Fire Blast. Unleashed Inferno's non-Flame Strike damage bonus increases 60%. Flame Strike damage bonus increased to 30%. Okay. Fervid Incantation now grants a 1% increased critical strike damage per point. Call of the Sun King no longer grants 15% increased Phoenix Flame damage, instead makes Phoenix Flames always critically strike, which I think is fine. Electrozia's Fury no longer makes Phoenix Flames always critically strike. And Hypothermia now has an activation overlay. Okay, so there's a lot of changes. Honestly, there's a ton of changes. Like similar to Arcane, just a huge change in fundamentally how it's built. Now you can either reduce the scope of your living bombs to create more single target damage, and also obviously to increase Phoenix Flame damage, or you go more AOE by increasing the overall scope and buffability of living bomb, and then just generally pushing to rather go with like Ignite, Flame Strike / Combustion builds to proc a little bit higher in your overall DPS. It's very interesting changes, and I think it'll kind of show out when you look at Mage in detail, but I think it's really, really cool and really, really important. And then finally we look at Frost. So Frost has a new talent, Death's Chill. Chill, bruh. While Icy Veins is active, damaging an enemy with Frostbolt increases spell damage. Stacks up to 10 times. This is really straightforward and basically allows you to increase single target damage. Permafrost Lance's Frozen Orb increases Ice Lance damage by 15% for 15 seconds. This is just a straight buff because of the integration of Frost Lance and Icy Orb. Fractured Frost has been redesigned. While Icy Veins is active, your Frostbolts hit up to 2 additional targets and deal 15% increased damage. Ice Lance damage increased, Flurry damage increased, Frostbolt damage increased, Ice Barriers Absorb increased, and Hailstone is now 1 point talent. So Frost, not getting a big rework in terms of talents, because I think the rotation for Frost was pretty good, and someone can correct me, but I genuinely think it's been quite fine. But just some raw damage number changes, and maybe a couple more talent changes to just kind of incorporate a little bit more of a choice for Frost Lance, and obviously stacking damage on single target bosses to help you out there. But yeah, I think overall, really good stuff. Mage, lots of changes, especially if you look at Fire and Arcane. Huge changes. So I'm very excited to see. I think Fire is looking pretty good. More playstyle options for Fire, I think, overall, which was feeling a little bit one note. And then Mage, Arcane getting quite a big revamp as well. So very, very cool. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. And yeah, that's it from me. Bye.